All right, let's try this again. 2.5 industrialization for U.S. history, part of westward expansion, part of the Gilded Age, a time period after 1865, but before 1901. Industry, it's a second industrial revolution. Let's see what we got. We got exploited, innovations, maimed, subsistence, excuse me, and tycoon. From 1860 to 1900, about the years that I gave. And especially after the Civil War, the United States experienced many changes. Railroads spread rapidly throughout the country, including West. Industries grew as new technologies emerged. People flocked to cities to find work in new factories. Conditions in Europe deteriorated and millions of immigrants flooded the U.S. Cities sprang up seemingly overnight in this new industrialized era. Before the war, most of the people of our nation had lived in rural areas and worked in farming, agriculture. By 1900, more than half of all Americans lived in urban areas or cities. Right, so influence of the railroad, steel manufacturing, that's Andrew Carnegie. Inventions and innovations, conditions were not pretty. Children at work, it's not pretty either. 16 questions for us to look at. Let's go through this real quick and see if I can't help you answer some. Much of the growth of American cities can be attributed to railroads. As we have seen, the railroads push back the frontier in less than 50 years. The railroads themselves provided millions of jobs by 1900. They also allowed people to move from place to place, allowing new cities to grow rapidly as new jobs became available in factories. The railroads also allowed for inexpensive and rapid movement of raw materials to factories. The railroads did not cause all the new growth, but they helped. All right, thank you for railroads. The Civil War and the growth of the railroads led to new demands for steel. For many years, American foundries have been producing large amounts of iron goods. However, steel refined from iron ore was much stronger and lighter than cast iron and therefore preferred for railroad tracks and the bodies of locomotives and railroad cars. However, iron was still used for many years to create the boilers for steam locomotives. Increased demand for steel led directly to a new process of refining it. In 1850, two different men independently discovered the blast of hot air could remove impurities from malted iron ore and turn it into steel. These were Americans William Kelly and Englishman Henry Bessemer, and the process became known as the Bessemer process. Something like it used to take a week to produce a ton of steel, literally 2,000 pounds. Now you can do it in 15 minutes. So, wow, right? North America had large amounts of two main natural resources for iron ore, and coal. The Appalachians had extensive deposits of both, and this is where most iron foundries and steel foundries were founded. By the late 1800s, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania had become an important iron and ore producing center. Pittsburgh Steelers. This is why we have Pittsburgh Steelers. In the late 1800s, huge deposits of iron ore had been found around Lake Superior, particularly in Minnesota Vikings, because that's where we believe Vikings used to actually go as well. The Great Lakes allowed for iron ore to be transported efficiently to cities such as Chicago, Illinois, and Gary, Indiana, which all became major steel producing centers. By 1873, enough steel had been produced that railroads switched to steel as their only material for producing rails. Some of the wealthiest men. Sorry, my sand got stuck. Literally, sand timer. By 18th, where were we? Some of the wealthiest men came out of the steel industry. Perhaps the most famous was steel tycoon Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie. Born in Scotland in 1835, Carnegie came to the U.S. in 1848 with his parents. He worked in a factory as a young man, he was like 10, 11 years old. Eventually led telegraphy to work for Pennsylvania Railroad as a personal assistant to the managers. He worked hard and invested his money in different industries, but mostly in oil. In 1865, Carnegie left the railroad and built a new company with manufactured railroad bridges. This is through his mentor, Tom Scott. Through these experiences, he learned that steel was very profitable and a necessary business. He started his own steel business and used the strategy of vertical integration to make his business profitable. Vertical integration, he owned everything, the iron ore, the trucks, the foundries, everything. He owned everything. Within a few years, he had gained control of everything needed to make steel. He owned the factories, but also owned and leased the iron ore deposits, his coal mining operation, even the ships who transported it. He owned everything. He produced steel more cheaply than anyone else can do it, and that was his empire. By 1899, Carnegie was one of the richest men in America. However, obsessed by his interest in business, he was always mindful of responsibility to use his wealth to help his fellow man. He began a young he began as a young man giving money to charities and trying to improve the lives of people. In 1901, Andrew Carnegie sold his steel company to J.P. Morgan for $500 million. Let's ask Google how much it is today. How much is $500 million worth in 1900? Equivalent to, see, this is $18 billion. 18.3, correct? Because hundreds, thousands, 18.3 billion. Oh, wow. He quit his business altogether and devoted his life to sharing his fabulous riches. All right. Innovations and inventions. The late 1800s saw new innovations and inventions. All right. We have new technologies coming out. We have the power loom, so we get to make more shirts, right? Looms for creating apparel. The steam engine, and at this point, the use of oil and petroleum or gasoline with gasoline powered cars will actually be invented as well. It wasn't always safe for people to work in factories, specifically women and children, as you will learn. But man, it's a time of boom. Um, Factories were being opened, existed for the purpose of making money for the owners. Their ideas were being put into action. Most factory workers work 6 days a week, often 70 to 80 hours, which is like 10 to 12-hour days, 14 to 16-hour days. Few of them ever worked less than 60 hours per week. If a worker was sick more than one day, they would hire a replacement. Work areas were often dirty and poorly lit. In mills, fibers floated with the machines. In other factories, coal and dust, metal shavings filled were suspended in the air, so you would breathe this stuff in. Conditions improved over time for several reasons, but this first generation of factory workers still worked hard. Children did work because they would fit inside machines so they can fix them. Many children were injured or maimed or killed in factories during this time. Not pretty, right? So you have 16 questions. Best of luck to you guys. Oh, industry. Amazing. Thank goodness we don't have this anymore. Adios.